Hello everyone, I'm Joe Cronin and welcome to the Toss-Up. Back-to-back weeks now where we're going to hit the hardwood as it's time to talk all thing Indiana women's basketball as myself and the crew will dive into how the Hoosiers will face with Terry Morin entering her decade coaching season at the helm of the Hoosiers. Stick around because we have a fantastic show coming up on the Toss-Up. Whether it is Coach Morin becoming the winningest coach in program history, Mackenzie Holmes returning for a fifth season and being named to the preseason All-American first team, or Sydney Parrish's dog Chanel Malibu Barbie, there's plenty of hype to go around for the Indiana women's basketball team, and we have a fantastic group to discuss the panel. IUSTV Sports co-director and Indiana women's basketball beat reporter Kelsey Dennehy, writer for Peegs Talia Goodman, writer for Inside the Hall Amanda Foster, and at the wall, my man and writer for Rivals, Mr. Zach Browning, a great crew, a full stacked crew, and we got to jump into it. This team was ranked number 9 in the preseason AP poll. Kelsey, I go to you first. Where do you fit? Where do you see that fit as the Hoosiers ranked 9?
You know, when I first saw it came out, I was like, okay, that's it. I think it's a proper rating. You know, they had a historic season last year, and they rocked it. But then they fell out pretty early in playoffs, and I think that part was a little bit shaky. And, you know, you can't disregard their historic season, but now they are ready to come back and just do better than they were before. And I think they have room to climb, but they're also at a good spot. They're in the top 10, and they should not have fallen out of the top 10.
Especially with a lot of the returns that they have. We'll dive into that later in the episode, but we won't talk about the team from the 305. A little bad blood right there. Talia, 9 in the AP poll. Thoughts?
I think it's perfect. I think if they have Grace Berger, they're top 5 without her top 10. I see Iowa and Ohio State being the 2 Big Ten teams above them, and having 3 Big Ten teams in the top 10, whoa. I mean, I think that's impressive in itself, and I think Indiana's at a perfect spot.
It was a loaded conference last year, shaping up to be another one this year. Amanda?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. You look at the Big Ten, you look at women's basketball in general, there are so many good teams. It makes sense for Indiana to be in the top 10. Like Kelsey said, it also makes sense for them to be 9th just because of who they've lost and who they have coming in and just all of the questions that are around this team given how last season ended.
Now, Zach, I'm going to send it to you here. This is not going to be about the AP poll, rather the Big Ten preseason rankings. Hoosiers are 3rd behind Iowa and Ohio State. What's your thoughts on that? Over, under, or properly rated?
You know, Joe, I'm going to have to go with properly rated. I think you've got 2 teams at the top of the Big Ten Conference in Iowa and Ohio State. Those are 2 teams that return a lot of talent. They're really good. They're going to show that this year early on and throughout the Big Ten Conference season. But then you look at the teams below Indiana in the Big Ten ranked inside the AP Top 25. You've got Maryland and you've got Illinois. Those are 2 teams that I don't quite put them in the same tier as Indiana, so I think there's sort of 2 separate tiers in the Big Ten. You've got the Iowas, the Ohio States, and the Indianas. Then you've got Maryland and Illinois just a little bit below, so I think properly rated.
Come February, we're going to have to come back to this discussion and just see where everyone is at in that mix. I want to jump into this team now. They returned 9 of their 12 players, 4 out of their 5 starters. Amanda, I'll go to you first. How important is that?
It's incredibly important. I don't think you can overstate it because of how successful they were last year. And the chemistry, everybody's talked about how it's even better than it was last year, and it was very good last year. And so you have these players like Sydney Parrish and Sarah Scalia who are returning for their second years now. They have a lot more experience under their belt. They're a lot more confident in their game. That's going to extend to the rest of the team. And they all know each other really, really well. You can already tell that from the preseason and just how everybody interacts with each other. And that's going to give them a real leg up against a lot of other opponents.
Talia, team returns an All-American and one of the best freshmen in the Big Ten as well. How important is that?
Absolutely huge. And I think Sydney Parrish said this, but she said, you know, we have 5 starters. I know Grace was the starter last year, but Sarah Scalia is a starter on pretty much any other team. So, I mean, I think it's huge. You have Gerzon back. You have Mackenzie Holmes. I mean, you have pretty much all the pieces to make up a phenomenal team this year.
It looks like Scalia is going to be more in the mix of that starting role. She was starting in the exhibition. Kelsey, thoughts?
I'm not going to fray from that story. Listen, with any team sport, the returning players are such a key part to the success of the team. And so when you have a season like the Hoosiers did last year and you get most of those players back, there's nothing bad about that. There's nothing bad about that.
The hype is definitely there, and already seen 2 top 10 teams get knocked off in the first week of play. Zach, I'll bring it back to you, not with the people that are returning, but some of the new faces. Terry Morton didn't hit the transfer portal as hard as she did last year, but brought in some 2 marquee freshmen. What are your thoughts on the newcomers?
You know, Joe, you've got the 2 newcomers as in the freshmen. You've got Lene Beaumont and you've got Juliana Lamandola. Then you've got the Ohio Valley Conference Freshman of the Year in Charnice Curry-Jelks. I think they're going to bring a lot. They're going to bring a couple of different things, though. For the freshmen, it's all about getting up to speed defensively. They have to buy into this defensive system that Terry Morin and the Hoosiers like to run, and then they can come in, get some playing time, and really provide for the Hoosiers offensively off the bench. For Charnice Curry-Jelks, she's in a little bit of a different role. She, again, has to come up to speed defensively coming over from the Ohio Valley Conference into the Big Ten. But the big thing for her, she's going to be needed to spell Mackenzie Holmes. We saw her go down late in the season with some injury issues. Her alongside of Lily Meister, they're going to be key to help make sure Holmes is healthy come the end of the season.
Now, we're all pretty much aware of Mackenzie Holmes' ability. She was an All-American, preseason All-American. I mentioned it now way too many times, but you can only say it so many times. It rings a nice bell to it. But this team did lose a very important starter, someone who was there for 5 years, was picked 7th overall in the WNBA draft, and that was Grace Berger. Talia, I'll go to you for this in terms of stepping up. How much is this team going to miss Berger's role?
A lot. I mean, I think especially on defense,
It's going to be quite frank.
That all I need to say are those 2 words, a lot. I think especially on defense, it'll be evident where Grace's leadership and her stability are kind of missed. She was a really consistent piece for this team, and I think Chloe Moore McNeil will do a pretty good part of stepping into that role, but I don't think you can replace it.
Who do you think will come into a role defensively along with Moore McNeil to possibly mold into what they had last year?
That's the question. I mean, I don't know. I think Moore McNeil is the one who I'm pretty confident can do that. I mean, her steal numbers from last year are really impressive. Otherwise, I think it's kind of a question mark there.
Now, Kelsey, in terms of stepping up, last season, the splash in the transfer portal led to a huge boost in the 3-point production from last season to 2 years ago in the 2021-22 season with Sydney Parrish, Sarah Scalia, and then obviously last year's freshman Giardin Garzone. And how do you see that success moving forward? Are they going to continue to build off that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you cannot disregard the absolutely stellar 3-point shooting that's coming from Giardin Garzone. So you have your staple. She's a sophomore now, and we saw it in Hoosier Hysteria. She was just drilling them. She was going at it, and she did awesome. But I think also Sarah Scalia cannot be left out of that conversation. Now, they played in an exhibition, but she shot 5 for 8 in that exhibition and had the most 3 points in that game. That didn't make sense. But you can't disregard her, and she said in her media day that she was better, and she's proved it already starting, and I think that she's only going to continue to do that.
She was top 10 in 3-pointers made at her time in Minnesota, and that was only 3 seasons that she spent there. Amanda, your question in terms of stepping up comes with the bench unit. Sarah was really the only main contributor off the bench in terms of points, and obviously some new faces and then some people who are now gaining experience. Who's going to have a bigger role in that second unit?
That's a tough question because I think you can make the argument for multiple players coming off the bench. I'm going to go with Lexis Bargesser, kind of in the role of what, Talia, you were talking about in terms of having a guard come in and fill in kind of that point guard role, because Lexis was doing that in the exhibition games. Granted, they were exhibition games, but she was doing it, and she was doing it at a very high level. I saw shades of Chloe Moore McNeil and Grace Berger in the way that she was passing and handling the ball and moving on the floor, which is very impressive. She's coming in after her freshman year, has a lot more confidence. Terry Morin's talked about it, how the best thing about freshmen is that they become sophomores. And so she's a sophomore, and that gives her so much more of an ability to come on and be a lot more comfortable on the floor. And I think we're going to see her throughout the season just continue to get better and better.
I guess in terms of sophomores, do you see Lily Meister's role increasing a little bit as Holmes' backup?
Absolutely. Because we saw the same thing from Meister in terms of confidence in the exhibition games already.
Now, Zach, in terms of stepping up, this one's pretty important. It just goes to the ball dominance that Grace Berger would take the ball up the floor and be able to just create offense. Because, yes, the offense ran through Mackenzie Holmes, but it was Berger setting that up. Who is going to be in that role now?
I think it's going to have to be a combination of a couple of people. You talk about Chloe Moore McNeil. She's going to have the ball in her hands a lot as the playmaker, as the player is going to set up and run the offense for Indiana, get the ball to where it needs to go. And as Amanda talked about, off the bench, it's going to be Lexus Bargesser. We saw it in the exhibition. She's going to continue to do that. When she comes in and replaces Chloe Moore-McNeil, or even when they play alongside each other, those two are going to work great in tandem to try and get the ball and get the offense going for the Hoosiers. And then another player for Indiana I expect to have a big year, especially in the playmaking role with the ball in her hands, is Yarden Garzone. On media day, Terry Morin talked about the importance of Garzone in the high post and getting the ball to her there where she can pass it to cutters, pass it out to shooters, because she draws so much attention at her size in the high post. I think she'll be an underrated watch and a player to keep an eye on in the playmaking department for the Indiana Hoosiers this year.
Could possibly be seeing a new look into what the offense has been molding to. I want to segue into more of the schedule that this team has. Obviously, once the time the show is posted, there will be one game under the belt of the year, and it's non-conference play we'll talk about first, because after the break we'll talk about Big Ten play. Amanda, I'll go to you first. A couple pretty tough marquee games in the non-conference schedule. How important with that, and what do you think that will show heading into Big Ten play?
It's going to show a lot, especially because Indiana plays Stanford in their second game of the regular season, because they have their one opener and then they fly all the way out to Stanford, which in itself is a lot for a team to do. We all know how good Stanford is and how good they have been for so many years. That's going to show a lot. Flying down to Florida is also going to show a lot. There are going to be a lot of eyes on those games. There's going to be a lot of pressure. And I think it's really important to have that, because there's going to be even more pressure once you get into Big Ten play. So it's going to give everybody the chance to adjust in those situations and let the newcomers kind of get a feel for it, let the returners get a feel for what they need to do in order to be successful in the games for the rest of the season.
Yeah, especially probably the three biggest non-conference games aren't even at home. That's pretty big.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. I mean, I like the Stanford, I like the Tennessee. I would have liked to see one more home game against a really good team, maybe a Virginia Tech or a Colorado or someone in that kind of area. I mean, Ohio State, Virginia Tech, LSU, they all have those schedules. Why doesn't Indiana? I like those games. I like them. I like the ones they have scheduled. I just don't know if it shows enough, and I think that voters especially really reward those marquee matchups.
You do have Mackenzie Holmes going back to her hometown this season when the Hoosiers play Maine, Kelsey's non-conference schedule.
I was actually going to mention that too, just because I think that's so awesome, and I think when you have a lot of new players, it's so important for that team bonding aspect, and they've talked about it all preseason, is how close they are. That's something that is really special to share. You get to see where your All-American kind of grew up and played and developed into who she is now, which I think is awesome. I also think Tennessee is going to be a big one, especially just the Fort Myers tournament altogether, because it's on a neutral court, and that is harder than it sounds. And it's also on Fox. They're on the big stage now, which is so awesome. It's so awesome that they're on the big stage, but that hasn't been the norm. And so I think that that's going to be an adjustment as well, that people might not think of initially, but it's definitely going to pose for an interesting couple matchups.
Yeah, I think both those games in Fort Myers, I mean, Princeton has been down in these past couple years, but they have a lot of history behind their program. But we're going to send it to break, and when we come back, it's all things Big Ten basketball. It's one of the best conferences this year in women's basketball, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the toss-up. We talked a lot about the team outlook for the Indiana women's basketball team and some of the non-conference slate that they have, but it's now time to talk about a conference that has one of the best basketball players in the country and three of top 10 teams in the nation as well, and that's the Big Ten. And I'll go to you, Kelsey, first. Who's coming on top?
So on top of the Big Ten, on top of the
Conference.
nation, because I'm thinking it might be both. They might double down, and I don't want to be redundant because the Big Ten is taking such a large presence in college basketball, and they have continued to grow in that regard. I think I wouldn't be surprised if Iowa won the Big Ten again, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it was Maryland or if it was Indiana. Or I think that it's a toss-up. No pun intended.
No pun intended.
But I think that it could play out a couple different ways, and I think we've seen already with the first games of the season, there's already been some really large upsets, and I don't think that's going to stop. I think things are going to shake out a lot differently, and so I see that happening too.
Indiana won the regular season outright last season, but Iowa was able to take over the Big Ten tournament champs, and it's competitive up at that top echelon.
Yeah, I mean, I've got Ohio State. They really dug into the transfer portal. They're healthy. As long as they stay healthy, I think they've got it under control. I know they were upset by USC the other day, but I mean, I think their comeback is just a testament to the way they play and what they can do this season.
And at least their head coach didn't wrongfully quote a movie after losing to USC in that matter. But Amanda, who's winning this Big Ten, maybe regular season or the Big Ten tournament?
My first thought is Ohio State, like Talia. I'm very excited to see how they're going to bounce back from last year. But like Kelsey said, I wouldn't be surprised if Iowa is in the mix. I wouldn't be surprised if Indiana and Maryland are also in the mix. And that's the beauty of the Big Ten, is that we're all sitting here and we can't decide on anything because there's so many teams that are going to be so good, and we know how crazy things are going to get at the end of the season and how crazy they're going to get even in the tournament. And so I can't give you like a fully definitive answer, but if I had to pick somebody, I would probably go with Ohio State.
So, Zach, when I bring it to you, Caitlin Clark has so much national stage behind her, and it's hard to think of a scenario where Iowa doesn't win the Big Ten, whether it's regular season or in the tournament. I guess, is this Iowa's season to lose as they're picked first in the preseason poll?
That's a lot of pressure to put on a team coming into the season. Of course, you've got Caitlin Clark, and that should just be enough for Iowa's case to win the Big Ten title this season. But you look at the teams. Talk about Ohio State, J.C. Sheldon, Cody McMahon, two incredibly talented players that I believe will probably be on the Big Ten All-American list, the first team All-Big Ten, come the end of the season. You've got other teams. It's going to be difficult for Iowa, just like any team in the Big Ten, to go on the road and win games, and also at home. There's just so many games and so many teams in the Big Ten that anybody can lose and anybody can beat anybody else on any given night. So I think it'll be hard to pinpoint and say this is Iowa's season to lose, but I think they're definitely the clear favorites heading into the season.
Zach, I'm going to bring it right back to you, and it's in terms of sleepers. We're not really going to talk about the top three unless you want to choose one of them as your sleeper pick in the Big Ten, but someone that might be a little surprising towards the end of the year.
My sleeper pick, and I know they're ranked. I know they're ranked coming into the season, but I'm going to go with Illinois. I think Illinois has got two fantastic players in Genesis Bryant, who just dropped a 30 bomb earlier this week, and then you've got Micaiah Cook, who I think is one of, if not the best guards in the Big Ten outside of the likes of Caitlin Clark and J.C. Sheldon. I think Micaiah Cook, her playmaking ability off of what Genesis Bryant is able to do scoring the basketball, I think that 1-2 punch in Illinois with Shauna Green at the helm, she's done a fantastic job with the Fighting Illini. I think they're my team to watch.
Well, thank you, Zach. You'll be back for the final question. Don't worry about that. Sleeper teams in the Big Ten. Amanda, who's going to surprise you?
I am excited about Purdue.
You're saying
Yes, and I'm firm in that. No, Katie Geralds has done a fantastic job of building a program and building a culture. They have 8 newcomers. Also, fun fact, they have 3 sets of sisters on the team, which as a twin sister, I love that. I think it's fantastic. But so I think with that, with the newcomers, people are not going to be looking at Purdue as somebody who can fully compete with the likes of the teams that we've already talked about. But I think they have a lot of potential because of what Katie Geralds is instilling in her team, and I think that they could take a lot of people by surprise.
That team chemistry might be off the charts with the
Right?
sibling pairs there.
Right? I might exactly.
Yeah, sibling
It's like telepathy.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
That's
They'll
a thing.
finish each other's sentences and maybe each other's baskets. So who knows? Talia, sleeper team in the Big Ten.
Okay, Anna and
Can we just
Elsa.
give that a moment? My sleeper team is going to be Michigan. I think they're really overlooked this year. I think they lost some pieces, but they got 3 grad transfers out of the portal that have each scored 1,000 points at their respective schools. Layla Felia, she's going to do it. She's primed for a big season. And I've talked to some Big Ten coaches, and they have said that Kim Erica Barnes always does better when she's under pressure. And she's under pressure this year. I mean, no one's really expecting them to do a whole lot, and I think they're going to surprise some people.
Well, I love surprises. Why not? Kelsey, sleeper team.
Listen, I'm going to jump right back to Illinois. I think that Genesis Bryant is a phenomenal player. They have that 1-2 punch, like Zach said, and they are nudges in the best way possible. I remember watching it when they came to Assembly Hall last year, and they were just on it all the time. And that's always going to be a team that is going to see some form of success because you just can't get away from them.
I like Nebraska as a sleeper team. They're receiving votes. They're just outside that top 25 for the preseason poll. They're 33rd, I believe. And I just think they have some big names that might be able to make some noise, might be able to pick off one of those top 4 teams come conference play. And I guess before we wrap it up, whether it's Indiana or any of the Big Ten teams, what conference game are you most looking forward to? Kelsey, I'll go. You first.
Gosh, I
little
have
bit of
so
spotlight right
many.
there.
I have so many.
I guess you can pick 3 if you really want.
Thanks.
Maybe that's a little too much.
Listen, I'm excited for the Iowa game. I think that they are doing something like Nebraska is in volleyball, where they're getting that really large national attention. And so I think coming off of Indiana's loss to them last year and the buzzer beater and how crazy that was, I think that's going to be an awesome game. I also think Maryland is going to be a great game. They almost lost to Maryland last year, and they definitely snuck up on them a little bit. And so I think that that's going to be a good game that's going to test a lot of different aspects of their team now.
Does the home and road matter, or you just think them playing each other is enough?
I would say I honestly just like the matchup. I think if you're playing Iowa at Iowa, that is going to make a difference. But each one half does the other.
Talia, most anticipated game of the Big Ten slate.
See, my answer is not really an answer because I think any of the top 3 teams, if they're playing each other, whoever's at home is going to win. That's my take. I think whoever's at home has that advantage, and I think it's always a toss-up. Sorry. I think it's always a toss-up between those 3 teams this year.
Oh, why not? I mean, the road games are tough, and that's just how Big Ten basketball is. Wherever you see it, road games are going to be tough.
That actually leads perfectly into my answer, which is Ohio State, because Indiana only plays Ohio State once, and it's on the road, and that in itself is a lot. And then you think about Ohio State just as a team, even bigger. And I think the fact that they only play them once puts a lot of pressure on that game. Granted, there's going to be a lot of pressure on Iowa just because it's Iowa, but I think from a game standpoint, the Ohio State one could end up meaning more in the long run for whichever team wins it, but especially if Indiana is able to pull that out, that's going to do a lot for them.
Especially because they only play them once.
Exactly.
Right.
That's
There's going to be some
Right.
weight to that.
Yeah.
I
And it's
100%
close by,
agree.
so Indiana fans will travel.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny because you think that like everybody's used to the home game situation now. Obviously, the away game, you go home, you go away. That's kind of how it works. But it sneaks up on them, and it's just I like that dynamic a lot.
I think the road game at Maryland for Indiana is going to be huge. That's a tough place to travel to. It's far, and it's going to be one of those grinded out games that it's going to show a lot of true colors right there. And Zach, to wrap things up, I'm not going to ask you about Big Ten games. I'm going to ask you, where's Indiana finishing in the Big Ten Conference?
It sounds cliche because they were projected to finish there heading into the season, but I have a hard time seeing them finish anywhere other than 3rd. I think Iowa and Ohio State are better teams. I think they're built for this long Big Ten season, and I think they're going to finish 1st and 2nd. And then you go ahead and you look at Indiana, they're 3rd, and you've got Maryland and Illinois coming up from behind them, but I have a hard time saying not 3rd place.
Does anyone else think Indiana finds their way in the top 2 spot or maybe even drops down?
I think 4.
4.
I think 4. I think
Maryland surpasses them?
I think a Maryland or an Illinois could. I'm not super confident in that answer because I think
Well, that's why we make the
Preseason is preseason.
That's
Yeah.
why we make the predictions.
Right.
That's why not.
Predictions are a fun game.
Yeah.
it is a fun game. If I'm playing the prediction game, I'm going 4.
Okay.
Yeah. I go 3. I think.
I like 3. I think playing Ohio State, like you said, Amanda, is going to be the teller.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yep.
For sure. I mean, I was important. I was exciting, but that single game is definitely, and where it's placed in the season, definitely going to be telling.
They'll have to figure out a little bit of their form, especially once again without Grace Berger's presence. But that will wrap up this week's show. A huge thanks for everyone joining this week's panel. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the TossUp23 and at the TossUp IU respectively, as well as IUSTV Sports on both Instagram and Twitter as well. There's only one thing left to do and time to launch it to the sky. Toss it up. Oh, wow, that was a good catch. Riley, you're up next.